Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the debate between the Democratic candidates for the Massachusetts House of Representatives 8th Norfolk District, which is comprised of parts of Mansfield, Stoughton, Walpole, and the entire town of Sharon. The two candidates that have qualified for the ballot in the primary are here with us this evening, and that primary, by the way, will be held on September 1st. My name is Bill Gouveia, and it is my honor to serve tonight as your debate moderator. Tonight's event is sponsored by the Democratic Town Committees of Mansfield, Sharon, Stoughton, and Walpole. The purpose of tonight's debate is to give you, the voters, an opportunity to hear directly from the candidates and hopefully use any knowledge or insights you may gain tonight when you go to the polls on September 1st for the state primary. Now, this debate is a little different from what you may be used to, with COVID-19 holding us all hostage for a little while. This event is being virtually transmitted and recorded, and it will be available on various online channels for rebroadcast. Before we introduce the candidates and begin, I'd like to briefly go over the rules for this evening, all of which have been agreed to by the candidates in advance. Each candidate will be allowed an opening statement of no more than 5 minutes. The order of the statements was decided by a coin flip earlier tonight, and as Massachusetts Democrats, we flipped a Kennedy half dollar. Following the opening statements, I will ask questions of the candidates. The chairs of the 4 Democratic Town Committees solicited questions from committee members, and they determined the questions being asked tonight, which they feel best represented the concerns of their committees. Other than myself and those committee chairmen, no one else has seen the questions. Each candidate will have 3 minutes to answer the question, and each candidate will be asked the same question. After both candidates have answered, they will each have 1 minute for rebuttal. The timekeeper for this evening is Alicia Rinaldi, co-chair of the Stoughton Democratic Town Committee, and she is the first timer I've ever worked with that has a xylophone. I'm really excited about the xylophone. So when the candidates are down to 30 seconds left, she will give them a signal, both a signal of holding up a sign and a melodious tone on her xylophone. She will do the same when they get to 10 seconds. After that, the moderator will politely stop any candidate who may run over the allotted time. When the questions are complete, each candidate will be allowed up to 3 minutes for a closing statement. There will be no audience participation at this debate. Only the candidates, the timekeeper, and the moderator will be heard. Please keep yourself muted. I know that sounds funny, but please don't unmute yourselves, because if we have everybody talking at once, it would be really hard to make sense of what the candidates were saying. It will be my job to make sure that all parties here this evening are treated with respect, and while we encourage a vigorous and spirited debate on the issues, there will be no personal attacks by anyone against anyone. And seeing the two candidates here we have this evening, I'm sure there's absolutely no problem or chance of that happening anyway. Now it is my pleasure to introduce the two candidates who are both seeking the seat vacated through the retirement of Representative Lewis Kafka. In alphabetical order, they are Mr. Andrew Flowers from the town of Walpole. Welcome, Andrew.
Great to be here.
And thank you. And from the town of Sharon is Mr. Ted Phillips. Ted, welcome to the debate.
Good evening.
Mr. Flowers, Mr. Phillips, we welcome you here and we look forward to hearing what you have to say. And now with that, we'll get right into our debate with the opening statements. And in accordance with our coin flip, the first opening statement will come from Mr. Flowers.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you, Ted, and thank you to all the organizers from the Democratic Town Committees and to our audience. So let's get into it. This is a critical moment in history, and urgency is required. There's no other way to put it. I'm running because we need a fresh infusion of bold leaders on Beacon Hill. Leaders with both the expertise, but also the backbone to confront the urgent problems we face, whether it's COVID-19 and recession in the short run, or climate change and inequality in the long run. My background as an economist and local leader makes me uniquely qualified for this moment. But first, a little about me. I grew up in a working class family that struggled. We moved more than 20 times across 5 states before I even graduated from high school. I saw my parents go bankrupt twice. As a teenager, I worked for my father's janitorial business, rising before dawn to clean office buildings and retail stores before racing to class. Fast forward to today, and after graduating from the University of Chicago, I've amassed more than a decade of experience in both the public and private sectors, including 5 years at the Federal Reserve during the last financial crisis. More recently, I was an economist with Indeed.com, the world's largest job site. So I know what it takes to help people get jobs, good jobs sometimes, jobs my parents dreamed of. Now, I live in Walpole with my wife, Anna, and our 2 little kids. My wife, Anna, is from Massachusetts, and we've chosen to live in this community because of the deep sense of mutual obligation and also the great public schools for our children, to be honest. We are settled here for the long run, and Massachusetts is now more of a home to me than I've ever known. And in Walpole, I've quickly become a leader, vice chair of the Finance Committee, chair of the Affordable Housing Committee, and I was recently reelected to a second 3-year term as a town meeting representative. Urgency is needed because Massachusetts, like all of America, is suffering from coronavirus right now. Over 8,000 people have died, and over 1.6 million have applied for unemployment insurance. A tsunami of evictions, foreclosures, and bankruptcies is coming. Yet, on economic relief, the State House isn't matching the urgency of the moment. On top of this pandemic and recession, the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and many other Black people by police have ignited protest and calls for reform. And rightfully so. I am proud to say Black Lives Matter. And more than that, I've joined in over a half dozen protests, marches, demonstrations, just here in the district. But the State House, again, isn't matching the urgency of the moment. Massachusetts is one of only 5 states that doesn't require statewide police licensing. Even before coronavirus and the murder of George Floyd, we had urgent problems to fix. A transportation system that was failing us, inequality that was high and rising. But ultimately for me, my urgency is for my children. I'll tell you a quick story. Last summer, my wife Anna and I, we were vacationing on a beach at the Cape. Our 2 kids, while they played in the sand one day, Anna and I heard a talk that night from a scientist who told us that that very beach by 2070 would be completely underwater due to rising sea levels. And it hit us. Wow. By the time our kids are in their 50s, they're going to look back at family photos to see a beach that will have vanished. Again, I'm worried that urgency is required because worse fates could face our children. More droughts, more wildfires, and yes, more pandemics. So the perils of climate change must be addressed. But again, the State House is not matching the urgency of the moment. The legislature has not led on climate since the Global Warming Solutions Act was passed in 2008. We can't adequately address climate change or racial injustice or coronavirus until we fix the State House. It is broken, plagued by inertia and complacency. So how do we fix it? To start, we need to radically improve transparency. More and more decisions are being made behind closed doors. Too many good bills are killed without a public vote. This is the bottom line, folks. While the status quo in Beacon Hill was not acceptable before 2020, now it's critical we don't settle for maintaining a broken system. The need for change is urgent. As an economist, I have the expertise. And as a progressive, I have the backbone. And I have urgency. I won't settle for the status quo, and neither should you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Flowers. And our second closing statement will be from Mr. Phillips.
I hope you meant opening statement, but I'm not ready to close.
Opening statement. That will be the first of probably several mistakes the moderator will make during the evening. But yes, it is the opening statement.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Ted Phillips, and as you've probably heard by now, because I've said it 100 times, I love this district. I grew up in this district about 2 miles down the road from where I sit right now in the Bird Streets in Sharon. I graduated Sharon High School in 2001. And then I went over to state school. I went to the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, where I got my degree in political science. And as soon as I got that, I moved back to the district. I joined my town's finance committee. And in 2006, after working a year in the Massachusetts State Senate, I got an opportunity to come work for Representative Kafka for this district. And I left at the chance. During my time at the State House, I got my master's degree in public administration from Suffolk University. And then after that, I got my beautiful wife, Bridget, who was an Easton native, to move over the line, begrudgingly, into the district so that we could build our life together here. If given the privilege of being your next state representative, I'm going to fight like hell for this district. Since I started working at the State House, we have done some great things for Sharon, Stoughton, Walpole, and Mansfield, but we do still have great challenges ahead of us. We have a transportation system that needs to be fixed. We have an environment that needs to be saved. We have healthcare rights that need to be protected. We have a pandemic to get through for sure, with rebuilding and planning, lots and lots of planning on the other side of it. And we have urgent work to do to push our towns and state forward on racial equity and closer to the Commonwealth that we should be, rather than the Commonwealth that we are currently. So with that, I look very much forward to this discussion tonight. Let's get to it.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Great job by both of you. And now we will go to the questions, and we will alternate the questions back and forth, which in most of these debates, I do manage to screw up, and the candidates do quickly tell me that I have gone out of order, but we'll try to do our best and see if I can manage to pull this off. So our first question will start with Mr. Flowers, and you both will get asked, as we said, the same questions. So Mr. Flowers, other than the fact that the seat became available, please tell us the 3 main reasons you decided to seek it.
Right now, we're at a generational moment in Massachusetts because we've always thought of ourselves as a progressive leader. And in many ways we are. The home of public education, the first place to really enshrine LGBTQ rights, to have a healthcare access reform in 2006. There's a lot to be proud of. But over the last decade, the legislation coming out of Beacon Hill doesn't really reflect the progressive values of the state, nor of this district. So the first reason that really triggered my interest in this seat is that the State House was broken when it came to addressing these generational challenges of climate change and inequality in particular. So fixing a broken State House was my first reason. The second reason was my children. I have a 4.5-year-old daughter, Vivian, who goes to preschool, or went to preschool, I should say, before the lockdown at Moose Hill Nature Preschool in Sharon. And she loved it there, and she's gonna be entering kindergarten next year. And then I have a 2-year-old son too, Luke, and he's still in daycare until the lockdown happened. So I saw my kids heading into a great public education system here in Massachusetts, but one that still needed improvement. In particular, there are disparities by race, by class, by income, that is, that aren't being addressed. The recently passed Student Opportunity Act was a good first step towards education equity, but more needs to be done, particularly with early childhood education. We need universal pre-K for 3- and 4-year-olds. Why? Because it just makes economic sense. The return on investment for universal pre-K is positive in the sense that it almost pays for itself. So second was my kids and education. But third, beyond inequality and climate change, those generational issues that weren't being addressed, and beyond my kids and the education system, it was a sense that voters weren't being told the truth. Voters deserve to know what happens at the State House, but more and more, even compared to 30 years ago under House Speakers George Kavarian and Finneran, the transparency at the State House has been abysmal, and it's frankly upset me. We're one of the least transparent state houses in the country. We don't publish basic committee votes, and too often bills are killed without constituents able to hold their state reps accountable. So that fired me up. That gave me a bit of a passion to want to reform the State House, because as I said in my opening, we can't fix any of these generational issues, climate change, education, inequality. We can't fix them until we fix the State House, and that's why I'm running.
Thank you very much, Mr. Flowers. Ms. Phillips, same question to you. Other than the fact that the seat became available, please tell us the 3 main reasons you decided to seek it.
Well, the first is actually just the people of the 8th Norfolk District. As I mentioned in my opening, for the past 14 years, I've worked for this district, and I've gotten a chance to know and love a lot of the people who I've been able to help as a staffer in the State House. It means a lot to me to make sure that our towns have the resources and the tools that they need to be as successful as possible for all of their residents. I think we've had some really great successes, and that leads me into my second point, is because of my experience, I know that I can be the most effective representative for this district on Beacon Hill. Taking those experiences that I've had, building the networks that I've been able to build up at the State House and in the district, I know that I will be able to most effectively represent the district and its needs. And as far as the third reason, I don't think I really need a third reason. Those are the two. It's the people and the fact that I know that that I'm going to make the most effective representative for the district.
Thank you very much, Mr. Phillips. We will now move to our second question. And for that one,
I'm sorry, Bill, are we going to do rebuttals?
See that? I told you I was going to make more mistakes. We'll do the rebuttal.
You're doing great,
Flowers,
Bill.
1 minute for rebuttal. For anything you'd like to say on that.
Sure. I really think there are two key roles of a state representative. One is constituent services, and I want to applaud Representative Kafka's office for doing a good job with constituent services. But the second key role of a legislator as a state rep is to push for statewide changes to fix interlocking problems that go beyond our district. So for example, transportation is a key issue. This district of 160 districts in the Commonwealth has the second highest average commute time to work. So no matter how good you are at constituent services and knowing what the concerns are of the citizens, you have to be able to pass bold visionary legislation to fix things like the MBTA system. We need to upgrade existing assets. We also need to address climate change, which we haven't really led on in 12 years. So these are issues that a state rep has to be held accountable for. But constituent services is key, and my experience on the Walpole Finance Committee and on the Walpole Affordable Housing Committee and being enmeshed in local finances will help listen to the district and provide the resources it needs.
Thank you, Mr. Flowers. Mr. Phillips, 1 minute for rebuttal for you.
I certainly appreciate Andrew's acknowledgement of the great job that we've done in constituent services in the office. I very much appreciate that. But I want to make this very, very clear for the viewers tonight as we go through these questions, because I assume we'll get to transportation and all that in the future. But I'm not Lou Kafka, and Andrew's going to try very, very hard tonight to run against Lou Kafka. I'm my own person, and I'm asking you to judge me on what I say that I'm going to do as a state representative and not on the track record of the man that I worked for, because that would not be fair. When I'm going, thank you, Alicia, I'm going to tell you exactly how I'm going to act as a state representative. I'm going to tell you some of the things that that I want to do up at the State House on behalf of the 8th Norfolk District, and I would ask you to judge me on that record, give me a chance, and if I don't live up to that record, vote me out in 2 years. But once again, not Lou Kafka.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. Now we'll move to the second question, and that question will begin with Mr. Phillips. Mr. Phillips, when it comes to women's health issues, how do you propose to improve in that area? Do you support passage of the Roe Act?
So very simply, yes, I do. I support passage of the Roe Act. I consider myself a strong pro-choice candidate. Women's reproductive health women's reproductive health care is health care. And I want to make sure that it is affordable and accessible, just like everybody else's health care in the Commonwealth. I'm very, very excited about the bill that the House passed yesterday, Representative Miranda and Kay Khan's act to disparities in health along racial lines. It's a 23-member commission that is going to look at the reasons why, at the underlying reasons for maternal health disparities. And so I think that once that commission comes up with recommendations on how we can reduce those, comes up with tangible legislative proposals, I look forward to voting for those at the State House.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. And Mr. Flowers, same question to you. When it comes to women's health issues, how do you propose to improve them and improve in that area? Do you support passage of the Roe Act?
Yes, I absolutely do. Why? Because abortion is a human right. Abortion is healthcare, and healthcare is a human right. In the Massachusetts legislature, I won't just fight to pass the Roe Act, which, by the way, has been languishing for years without even getting a fair vote on the House floor. despite many people in the Democratic caucus being co-sponsors of the Roe Act. It's languished. Why? Because too many state reps give lip service to the Roe Act, say they support reproductive rights, but they won't actually go on the record to have a vote for it. Now, again, to take a step back, we like to think that Massachusetts is progressive and leading in many of these areas, but when it comes to reproductive rights, we're not. What does the Roe Act do? It does three things. It enshrines the protection of a woman's right to choose in our laws. Right now, it's only legal at the state level through a Supreme Judicial Court decision. So if Roe v. Wade at the national level were ever to get overturned, that would be a vulnerability. That's the first thing it does. But the second thing it does, it also helps women who are minors, or women and pregnant people who are minors, who have to go before a judge if they can't get parental consent. And for many people, you think, well, what big deal is that? But for the women who have to go before a Superior Court judge, they're often poor, they're Black and Latino women who are pregnant, and this is a real burden. And so we have to remove that obstacle and allow minors to seek abortion care when they want it. Third, what does the Roe Act do? It would extend the ability to have a third trimester abortion for pregnant people who have a fatal fetal anomaly. And this is a devastating decision for women and pregnant people in Massachusetts, and we need to enshrine that right to exercise an abortion at that stage. So that's what the Roe Act does. But too many state reps will just sign on as a co-sponsor, and for years, session after session, it just gets killed in secret committee votes. We don't actually have an ability to hold these reps accountable on whether or not they're going to put their money where their mouth is. But beyond the Roe Act, I also support the Healthy Youth Act for comprehensive sex education, which is a form of women's health care as well as the Liz Miranda bill, which would address racial disparities in maternal health. It's a racial injustice that Black women are twice as likely to die of pregnancy-related causes as white women. And so Representative Miranda's bill that passed, I think it was unanimously yesterday in the House, is a first step towards that. What does it do? It starts a commission to make recommendations, but we have to act because budgets reflect our values. And if we're not going to put resources behind reducing maternal disparities by race, then we're not really living up to fighting for women's health care.
Thank you very much, Mr. Flowers. And 1 minute for rebuttal, Mr. Phillips.
Thank you, Bill. I'm actually very glad that Andrew brought up the Healthy Youth Act. Both the Roe Act, was filed by Speaker Pro Tem Pat Haddad. The Healthy Youth Act was filed by the Municipalities and Regional Government Chair, Jim O'Day. Both have endorsed my candidacy for state representative. And the reason that they've done so is because they know that I am going to be an effective legislator on day one. They want me on their team fighting for these bills. They've made it very, very clear that they know who can get the job done on Beacon Hill, who can move these bills from bills into law, and I'm proud to be that candidate. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. And Mr. Flowers, 1 minute for rebuttal for you.
If people really wanted to pass the Roe Act, they would be willing to publish committee votes. You can't have one without the other. Because why hasn't it been passed for many sessions? Years we've gone with lip service saying, I'm going to fight for the Roe Act, fight for reproductive rights in Massachusetts. Yet we're going to be okay with the status quo that lets that bill get killed with a study order or a delayed vote in a committee where we can't even hold those reps accountable. So the solution isn't just fighting for it. A huge majority of House Democrats support it. It doesn't lack support. That's not the problem. It lacks people willing to change the Beacon Hill culture.
Thank you very much, Mr. Flowers. Now we'll go to question number 3. This may have a familiar ring to it. And we'll start this question with Mr. Flowers. Mr. Flowers, transparency has not exactly been a hallmark of the state legislature. It's one thing to talk about transparency, but it's a completely another thing to practice it. What will you pledge to voters tonight regarding your willingness to be transparent on your votes, positions, and the actions of the House? And just as importantly, how will you manage to be transparent in an institution that frankly has a reputation for being exactly the opposite?
It's a great question, Bill. I'm glad you're bringing it up because this is, again, one of those 3 issues that got me into this race. I have signed the Voters Deserve to Know pledge, which is put out by Act on Mass. And by signing it, I would do 3 things. I would publish all my individual committee roll call votes, which again, in many cases are inaccessible or not published at all. I would publish that, first of all. Second, on any committee I serve on, I would demand and vote to have all committee testimony and votes be made public. Third, I would stand for roll call votes in the State House to have more of a debate. Now, I'm the only candidate in this race that has signed the Voters Deserve to Know pledge. And I know that may be upsetting to House leadership and the status quo that I'm taking that approach, but it's necessary. Why? Because this is not inside baseball. Improving transparency matters because right now the bottleneck to sensible progressive legislation is not the governor. Why? Even though he's a Republican, we have a veto-proof majority of Democrats in both chambers. Second, it's not the state Senate. The Senate passes a lot of progressive legislation. The Senate publishes their committee roll call votes. They're quite transparent. The bottleneck to sensible progressive legislation is the House. So let me tell you a story. The way voting works at the State House, and Ted knows this, is there's a big scoreboard, and there's either a green light, red light illuminated next to a rep's vote. So last year, January 2019, reps were voting on a bill, and the speaker's light was red. Okay, so you have 3 minutes to cast your vote. But it was caught on a hot mic that the presiding officer said, oh no, it's a yes vote. So the speaker's light changes from red to green, and you see over 60 House Democrats, like a Christmas tree, change their vote from red to green, red to green. They were just following the leader. And this is the problem with the Beacon Hill culture. It's very much a top-down hierarchical system. You're supposed to fall in line and follow the leader. That is the bottleneck to sensible progressive legislation. We have over 7,000 bills filed in the legislature. Only 2 to 3% actually ever make it through and get passed. But even most of those bills are pretty frivolous. They're fixes to state employees' sick leave accounts. They are liquor licenses. The real ambition gets done in the last 5 or 6 weeks, which is a terrible system when you have a global pandemic you're dealing with. Because right now this summer, in addition to passing a budget, which was supposed to be done by today's the new fiscal year, the State House was also supposed to address all the COVID-related emergencies, which I give them credit for. There's lots of uncertainty there, so of course you need time to address it. But what about transportation, climate change, housing? All these bills are piling up, and we only have 1 month left in formal session. We need to have a better pace of legislation. There needs to be more debate on the House floor. And again, like I said, 30 years ago, there was more debate on the House floor, but things have changed, and I'm not going to stand for the status quo. Neither should you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Flowers. Mr. Phillips, same question to you. Transparency has not exactly been a hallmark of our state legislature. It's one thing to talk about transparency, but another thing to practice it. What will you pledge to voters tonight regarding your willingness to be transparent on your votes, positions, and the actions of the House? And just as importantly, how will you manage to be transparent in an institution that frankly has a reputation for being exactly the opposite?
Thank you. It's a great question. As somebody who's worked in the House for the last 14 years, I have been very dismayed by the pace and the lack of progress on some of the legislation that has come up. There have been a number of bills that are long overdue for passage. What I pledge to the voters of the 8th Norfolk District, and I don't sign pledges. I have a policy against it because to me, pledges are basically government backed. When you lock yourself into pledges, particularly on legislative policy, oftentimes the legislative policy that you say you're going to vote for can change on its way to the floor of the House for a vote. So if there are amendments to the bill that you want to pass, you get the bill to the floor and it sometimes looks nothing like what you pledged to vote for, but you're locked into a pledge. So it's best not to go down that road. What I would pledge to the voters of the 8th Norfolk District is that you will always know where I stand on a particular issue. I will always be transparent about where I stand, how I'm going to vote. I'm going to make sure that my communication strategy is strong and robust so that people know what votes are coming up and how I intend to vote on them. That said, let's talk about how we can make tangible reform to move some of these bills out of committee and onto the floor of the House. I have a proposal currently to change the joint rules of the legislature so that you have a majority of co-sponsors in the House and the Senate, 81 in the House, 21 in the Senate. Your bill cannot be sent to study. Therefore, the committee will have to take action on it, either giving it a favorable report, a favorable with an amendment, or a negative report. And we'll have to justify that, but at least we will get some of these bills a response out of committee and move them closer to the floor for a vote. The second place, comes from some of the procedural. It's a bit nitty gritty and inside baseball, I recognize, but I used to work for the chair of steering policy and scheduling when Lou chaired the committee. We had a 30-day deadline to act on bills that hit our committee. At the end of the 30-day deadline, if we didn't act on the bill moved forward in the legislative process to the Committee on Bills in the Third Reading. That Committee on Bills in the Third Reading, is the second place where bills go to die. And unfortunately, they have a 30-day deadline, but there's no enforcement mechanism on the back end. So what I'm proposing is an enforcement mechanism that we can use so that if bills that hit bills in the third reading have, hit their 30-day deadline, it will automatically move forward for a vote in the House. I think this is a tangible way that we can actually start moving these bills and start, getting some of the progress on the long stalled out bills, as Andrew pointed out, like the ROE Act, like the Safe Communities Act, like a number of the climate change related bills that we all want to see action on but have been held up. Because I do believe that I am the one who can get real reform done because I've been there and I know how the system works and I know how to fix the system from within.
Thank you very much, Mr. Phillips. Mr. Flowers, 1 minute for rebuttal.
So I want to add one more thing, because I can speak more than 3 minutes on this, about my own intentions in the legislature, and then I want to respond to what Ted says. The one thing I left out is this idea of priority bills. So in the Nebraska legislature, every legislator has a priority bill, which they're guaranteed a hearing on earlier in the session, and they're also guaranteed a floor vote on. So regardless of how many co-sponsors it has, you're guaranteed that your bill that you pick, you get one per session, gets everyone has to go on the record about that. I would do that, support that. Second thing, in response to what Ted said, if he's going to tell you that you won't sign pledges on policy, I agree with him. This is about process. This is not policy. And if you say you're going to be transparent, then why won't you sign the voters deserve to know pledge? It's very simple in terms of you would make your committee votes public, which I hope you would do. But furthermore, you need a vote in committees and in terms of House rules to make all committee votes public. It's abysmal and it's a shame that they're not already.
So as I've said,
thank you. Go ahead, Ms. Phillips. 1 minute for rebuttal.
As I've said, I don't, as a principal, I don't do pledges because I feel like if you could start doing pledges, you're going to be asked to do other ones, and it becomes a slippery slope. My committee votes will absolutely be public. I'm happy to tell people how that goes. Currently in the legislature, the system is somewhat decentralized on committee votes in that the committees set their own rules, and the committees vote whether or not to make their votes public. Whatever committee that I am assigned to, once I get up there on Beacon Hill, I will absolutely ask the chairman and vote to make those committee rules public. But again, it's a decentralized process, and I'm not going to tell other committee chairs how they need to run their committee. That's unfair.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, and we'll move to the next question. And this question will begin with Mr. Phillips. Mr. Phillips, safe, efficient, cost-effective public transportation is critical, not just for this district, but for the entire state. The Providence-Stoughton line has some of the oldest trains and the highest rates of canceled or late service. Walpole train service has been negatively impacted by the Foxborough pilot program, and parking in most stations in the district is limited and has gotten even further reduced within the past year. What proposals will you offer and/or support regarding the MBTA and transportation in general? How will you improve service in the district?
So the short answer is electrified regional rail for the Providence and Stoughton line. We have the tools in place. We have the stanchions over the Providence line right now because of the Amtrak, the electrified Amtrak lines. We can very, very easily switch our diesel trains on that line over to electric and make a great first step in terms of both environmentally and efficient wise. Secondly, I oppose the South Coast Rail. I've hated that project since the beginning. I believe it is a waste of time. It is very, very damaging to the community of Stoughton because it double tracks where the single track is already in the northern part of the town, and in the southern part of the town, it reestablishes a double track rail bed that will cut Morton Street off from 138, and I just don't see the sense in it. If we had taken $1 billion back in the 90s or early 2000s when the South Coast Rail was originally proposed, and we had given $1 billion to Fall River and $1 billion to New Bedford, and invested in those cities would now be high-tech manufacturing hubs that could be doing offshore wind production and other green technology jobs. And currently, we're trying to connect them to Boston in a way that would ask them to pay for a Zone 8 pass, which currently retails for about $388. It doesn't make any sense. And the ridership's not going to be there because, as you see, the ridership is not there on the Foxborough line, which, you know, ripped up South Walpole on its way to becoming a reality. The MBTA has been massively, massively inefficient. They need to fix the service that they have before they move to expand. I firmly believe that, again, one of the reasons that the Foxborough pilot is not currently working is because people did not have a good opinion of the MBTA when the train came to town. If the MBTA, if we invested in the MBTA where it currently exists and caused, you know, upgrades, because again, as you pointed out, the Stoughton line is one of the worst performing lines for, you know, being on time. If we improve the system as we currently have it, I think that would be a much better investment in the long run. We can do more to upgrade it to, like I said, to the electrified option rather than the diesel option, which would then give us a more environmentally friendly and efficient system. So that's where I stand.
Thank you, Ms. Phillips. Ms. Flowers, same question to you. Safe, efficient, cost-effective public transportation is critical not just for the district, but for the entire state. The Providence-Stoughton line has some of the oldest trains and highest rates of canceled or late service. Walpole train service has been negatively impacted by the Foxborough pilot program, and parking in most stations in the district is limited and has gotten even further reduced within the past year. What proposals will you offer and/or support regarding the MBTA and transportation in general, and how will you improve service within the district?
First of all, I just want to say I completely agree with the premise of the question. Our transportation system here in the greater Boston area is broken. And in January, when I launched my campaign, this was the #1 issue I was running on. We definitely don't have a safe system. You mentioned that, right? We have had 40 derailments in the last 5 years. That's unacceptable. It's not efficient. As you alluded to in the question, there's lots of delays. And finally, it's not really cost effective. We've had fare hikes rise over the last 2.5 decades while the gas tax is flat. So no wonder ridership is down and traffic or gridlock on our roads is up. We have the worst traffic in the country, the 8th worst in the world. So what are we going to do about it? First of all, this is an area where I agree with Ted, but I'm going to get a little specific. We need to upgrade the current MBTA assets. The Fiscal Management and Control Board needs to identify those upgrades, but this is going to cost money. So let's talk money for a second. Let's not beat around the bush. I'll be straight with you. We're going to need to raise progressive revenue to fund a world-class transportation system. Where's that money going to come from? First and most easy, low-hanging fruit is the millionaire's tax. This is also known as the Fair Share Amendment, a 4% surtax on incomes above $1 million. That'll help fund some of our transportation upgrades. Also, though, in the long run, we're going to have to electrify rail and bus systems because transportation is the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in the Commonwealth, over 40%. But beyond the long-term progressive revenue streams, we have short-term issues right now. And again, the House is not up to the urgency of the moment. I will give the House credit on this one thing. They passed an $18 billion bond bill in March, just before the lockdown. And this included a modest increase in the gas tax, which I do support. And this was going to go to some transportation improvements. Okay, great. Also part of this flow of legislation was increasing Chapter 90 reimbursement rates for roads and paving. It was going to go up 50% from $200 million to $300 million. But here's where the House's urgency has fallen short. They've gotten cold feet. Who's they again? I don't know exactly. Committee chairs, House leadership, it's not clear. But the House wants to walk back this Chapter 90 improvements to $100 million of investment. But again, if we're going to upgrade the MBTA, we're going to have to raise progressive revenue and improve service because right now, more and more people are taking their car to work if they go into Boston, and that's creating huge traffic problems. So being straight with voters about raising progressive revenue and having targeted upgrades to existing assets, that's my answer. But the long run vision is we need a Massachusetts Green New Deal that will electrify our bus and rail system. That's the true transportation solution for the long run.
Thank you, Mr. Flowers. Mr. Phillips, 1 minute for anything you'd like to add.
Sure. As the only candidate in this race who actually has commuted to Boston for the last 15 years, both by train and by car, nobody's more aware of the problem than me. Andrew is actually, unfortunately, incorrect on the bond bill. We did do the 300 million. The Senate did not go along with it, which is why the House had to pare it back and send it over to the Senate with a $200 million number. That was directly as a result of Senate inaction, not House inaction. So again, while I've been frustrated with the pace of action in the House, that one is not one that you can chalk up to the House of Representatives. So I would point those two things out. And again, I just believe that I'm not afraid of moving towards, of discussing revenue. I'm not afraid of taking a hard vote to raise revenue. But the fact of the matter is the MBTA is a chronically mismanaged system, and we need them to be better managed and reevaluate some of the projects that they're doing before we look at new revenues.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. And Mr. Flowers, 1 minute for anything you'd like to add.
Yeah, I would just like to add that, in my riding of the commuter rail to WeWorks in Cambridge and Boston and at the Seaport, I would often think, gosh, this would be amazing if we had world-class fast service like exists in Europe. But to get there, we're going to need bold leaders. I did give credit. I said this is the one thing I'm often hard on the House. The House did pass that $18 billion bond bill in early March. But again, bond bills are one thing, and committing to kind of a debt budget that helps a little bit over 30 years is one thing. But to raise progressive revenue and to be bold about it is what we want, and that's what I've said on my website, and I'll continue to fight for at the State House.
Thank you very much, Mr. Flowers. We'll now go to our next question, and this one we will begin with Mr. Flowers. Mr. Flowers, voting rights is a national debate, but it's largely a state responsibility. Specifically, what is your position on the concept of ranked choice voting and voting rights for convicted felons? And we understand you would have to know the specifics of any particular bill, but voters want to know your thoughts on the specific concept.
The short answer, to be honest with you, is yes and yes. I support both ranked choice voting. If it makes the ballot, if it's on the ballot this November, I'm going to vote for it. And I support re-enfranchising convicted felons, as I think 14 states have done across the country, and actually 2 states allow currently incarcerated individuals to vote. Voting, it should be in the Constitution as a guaranteed right. And so to answer that last question first, and then to spend more time on ranked choice voting because it's complex, I fully believe in giving both formerly convicted felons who are released a right to vote, but also currently incarcerated individuals a right to vote, because a right is a right. And just as food and healthcare and housing are rights, and we give those to prisoners, the right to participate in your democracy is key. And you don't want to live in a society where we permanently disenfranchise someone because of a mistake they made. I don't want to live in that society. But to turn to the ranked choice voting issue, and for those who don't know, just in 20 seconds, I'll do the best I can. Ranked choice voting is, rather than pick one individual, so say there's Bill Smith, Ted Phillips, and Andrew Flowers, you can rank your 3 choices according to those 3 options. And Bill Smith is a fictional character here. So ranked choice voting has been proven to solve a few problems. One, it's the spoiler issue of third parties. We all remember how Al Gore lost as Democrats the 2000 election. And to some extent, you could argue even Jill Stein had an effect in certain states for Donald Trump's victory. So having an option to choose Jill Stein number 1, but then choose Hillary Clinton number 2, and whenever the last person's votes are marked off, there's all those voters who had the number 1, their second choice is counted. So the thing about ranked choice voting, and this is where I'm going to get a little nuanced here, is it's really effective for primaries. So up in Lowell, there was a congressional election 2 years ago that had, I think, 13 candidates in the Democratic primary. Lori Trahan, Congresswoman Lori Trahan, won that race with, I think, 21% of the vote. That's not an effective election when you winning 20% of the vote. And we're seeing that right now for Kennedy's congressional seat in the 4th district. Ranked choice voting really works well for primaries when you have lots of options. But when you pick party primaries and then have them in the general, that's where the constitutionality of ranked choice voting comes into question. But as an experiment, as a way to actually reduce polarization in our body politic, as a way to bring people together and have more options, and frankly, to encourage breaks from the two-party system. And I say that even as a Democrat, we should have more choice. That is why I support ranked choice voting. I think it's going to be a good experiment. But the short answer, start with primaries and then ease into it for general elections in the future.
Thank you very much. And just so you know, Bill Smith just called and wants equal time in the debate now. But Mr. Phillips will pose the same question to you. Voting rights is a national debate, but largely a state responsibility. Specifically, what is your position on the concept of ranked voting and voting rights, ranked choice voting, and voting rights for convicted felons? And we understand you would have to know the specifics of any particular bill or plan, but voters want to know your thoughts on that, on those specific concepts.
So on the concept of ranked choice voting, I am completely in favor. As someone who lives in the 4th Congressional District with you and so many others, we have, I believe, 9 candidates running to replace Joe Kennedy. It's my personal opinion that there are a number of candidates who I like very much. You know, I've chosen my candidate for the 4th, but I think, you know, I want to be able to say, you know, these are my top 5, you know, and rank them all the way through 1 through 9, because if my candidate is not successful in the primary, then I would hope that, you know, other candidates who I like almost as well would have an opportunity to win that primary, and if they're deemed viable. So I like the concept of ranked choice voting. It seems to be working out very well in Maine, which is the only state where it's been implemented. And I certainly I support its moving to the ballot, and I support it, and I will be voting for it. The second question, which is voting for convicted felons. I support when you, once you pay your debt to society, I support full restoration of voting rights. While you are currently incarcerated, I do not, because when these folks are removed from society and they are put into a certain place, perfect example, we'll say Cedar Junction in Walpole, because it is closest prison to where we live. People who are serving their sentence at Cedar Junction are not active in Walpole politics. They don't know the issues that are going on in Walpole. They're not familiar with the community. And so my fear is that they would, you know, basically sway an election. Walpole's had some very contentious elections, had a very close select board that, you know, if the candidate who lost the race had gone down to the prison and mobilized voters, would have gone very differently. And I don't think that that's the right way to approach it. I think that once you pay debt to society, you should absolutely have full re-enfranchisement, full voting rights. You know, we see what was going on down in Florida, where they were trying to keep people from getting their voting rights back. I supported question 4 down there, which was, you know, re-enfranchisement, and that's how I feel about the issue.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. Mr. Flowers, 1 minute for rebuttal.
Yeah, I just want to make a clear point here that this is a racial justice issue, because in Florida, I also supported that initiative, that ballot initiative. You have a hugely disproportionate share of Black men who are just permanently barred from voting. But even if you just include the current prison population, it's a significant effect. And ask Vermont if you're wondering how it is to allow currently incarcerated individuals to vote. I don't see school committee candidates from the local races, you know, holding signs outside the prison gates. It's frankly ridiculous that they would kind of sway local elections or even have the ability to vote in local elections. You could argue for federal prisoners that they should just be able to vote for the president, and for state penitentiaries, just state issues. To me, I just want to remark that Cedar Junction inmates aren't following the school committee race in Walpole, and nor are they going to sway the election there.
Thank you, Mr. Flowers. Mr. Phillips, 1 minute for your rebuttal.
I don't think that they are following the school committee race, which is why I would be concerned about having, you know, allowing inmates to vote while they're currently serving their sentence. Along the racial equality issue, that's one of the reasons why I support in the census population. I do believe that the inmate population should be counted at their home address, where they are living or where they lived before they got to whatever correctional facility that they're in, rather than, you know, being counted for a population currently being a prison population currently in a specific town. So that's how I would address, the quote unquote racial equality issue that you're talking about.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. Our next question, and this question we will begin with Mr. Phillips. Mr. Phillips, the Massachusetts elected officials of color put out a 10-point plan, and the Massachusetts Democrats Mass Dems issued a statement and a plan of action in the aftermath of the deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Rashad Brooks, and many, many other Black men and women at the hands of police officers. Do you support the Black Lives Matter movement? If elected, what will you do to promote racial justice and police reform in the Commonwealth? And how will you, as an elected official, ensure that Massachusetts makes any amends for its past works and works towards becoming a leader in these efforts?
Absolutely. Black Lives Matter. I will say it again, Black Lives Matter. Since George Floyd's murder, I've had a lot of time to look inward. I've had a lot of time to self-examine. And while I'm very proud of the fact that I have always considered myself an ally to the Black and Latino community, being an ally is no longer enough. I fully support the efforts of the Black and Latino Caucus. You referred to their 10-point legislative plan. Points 5 through 8 are all issues which require state legislative approval. I'm looking forward to voting on that, except for the fact that I'm cautiously optimistic, that that will be taken care of by the time I get to the State House. There has been a commitment from Judiciary Chair Claire Cronin, working with the Black and Latino Caucus, to get a bill done and to the governor's desk by the end of July. I take them at their word that they're going to be able to get that done. So as a state representative, as an effective state representative, we need to talk about what's next. And so the two policy areas that I've identified as ways that I can be supportive to the Black and Latino community as we move towards race equity in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts is civil service reform, where we change the weight in certain civil service exams in order to make sure that our public safety agencies and our public safety officials look more like the communities that they are serving. The second is minority access to capital. We have had a major problem for a very long time, not just in Massachusetts, but in the entire country, about minority-owned small businesses getting access to capital in order to start those businesses. Banks have made some efforts, but certainly not enough. This is a place where the state can get involved. There are programs like that, like the diversity program through the Massachusetts Growth Capital Commission, that will actively back some of these loans so that small businesses, minority-owned small businesses, can get off the ground. The second place that we can work in that one is through the Supplier Diversity Office, which has the state-owned Minority and Women-Owned Businesses Office, or SWAMBA is the acronym for short, making sure that they have the resources that we can make sure that states' contracts are available and accessible for minority-owned businesses to be able to bid on those contracts and to be able to win those contracts. Will go a long way towards providing necessary, tangible steps that we can take towards race equity. Those are what I'm excited about when I get up there. Like I said, hopefully we'll get some things done before then, but I'm excited about what's next.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. And Mr. Flowers, same question to you. The Massachusetts elected officials of color put out a 10-point plan, and the Mass Dems issued a statement and a plan of action in the aftermath of the deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Rashad Brooks, and many, many other Black men and women at the hands of police officers. Do you support the Black Lives Matter movement? If elected, what will you do to promote racial justice and police reform in the Commonwealth? And how will you, as an elected official, ensure that Massachusetts makes amends for any of its past and works towards becoming a leader in these areas?
Black Lives Matter. As I said in my opening statement, it's not enough to say it. And white silence here, both with your actions and your words, is not helping. And I have been proud to participate in the protest marches, whether in Stoughton, Sharon, Walpole, Mansfield. All throughout the district, I've showed up at every one of the 6 or so events I could make it to. And I've been inspired in this dark year with coronavirus and our president and the economy. It has been inspiring. So yes, absolutely, Black Lives Matter. I fully support the movement. I support the Black and Latino Legislative Caucus's 10-point plan. I have on my own website a racial justice plan that was vetted. It was run by experts, activists, and especially people of color. And in that plan, not only do I say I support it, the 10-point plan, I also draw from other resources, and I'll expound on those. So number one, this is where Ted and I agree. A post system has been needed, and it's long overdue. I mentioned at the outset, Massachusetts is one of 5 states that doesn't have statewide licensing for police officers. Governor Baker has been on this issue even before the murder of George Floyd. So I am optimistic that that will get done. But we have to go further. And by the way, I should give a shout out to Representative Russell Holmes, who's been pushing for a post system for years. Second issue to move on to, limits on use of force. Representative Liz Miranda, one of the few women of color in the legislature, has put out a bill that would ban rubber bullets, tear gas, chokeholds, for goodness sakes. Those have no place in law enforcement. But racial justice is more than just police reform. There's systemic racism in all our institutions, healthcare, housing, education. And in terms of what we will do as a state, as a commonwealth that takes stock of systemic racism in our history and in the current day, here are 3 things I'll mention. 1, we need a commission to study systemic racism. Again, some of these same leaders I've mentioned have been pushing a bill that would do just that for years, and it's languished until now the pressure's on and hopefully it gets through. That's 1. 2, we need to have racial justice education as part of our school curriculums. Every school, every year, that should be mandated. It shouldn't be an assembly after another Black person gets killed by police, that a school has an assembly and checks a box, or even just Black History Month where we just check a box. No, racial justice education is crucial as part of every student's development. And we should have racial justice professional development for teachers as well. But the third and final thing I'll mention is, remember how I mentioned Representative Liz Miranda and Representative Russell Holmes? Well, the entire House leadership team is white. The only leader in the Beacon Hill universe who's a minority is a Republican in the Senate. I've committed to not supporting a House Speaker who doesn't have at least 1 person of color in the leadership team. It's a disgrace.
Thank you very much, Mr. Flowers. Mr. Phillips, 1 minute to add anything you'd like.
Sure. Last session, Speaker DeLeo actually had an assistant majority leader in Byron Rushing, who had a phenomenal history of leading the Black community, and his House Ways and Means chair was Jeff Sanchez. Both exceptional legislators and members of the legislature who were persons of color. Unfortunately, for reasons that were certainly beyond my understanding, because I thought they were doing a fantastic job, they were defeated in primaries by challengers. So while I certainly hope that the House leadership team will become more diverse as minority members of the legislature gain seniority, the simple fact is that we did have some great leaders of color in the legislature who lost their seats. So again, as some of these other leaders like Liz Miranda and China Tyler step up, I look forward to seeing them become members of leadership. I think that they would make a fantastic chairperson, or even beyond that, even higher.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. Mr. Flowers, your 1 minute.
Byron Rushing lost to John Santiago, and Jeffrey Sanchez lost to Nika Elaguarda, both of which are people of color who ran on a platform of increasing transparency and challenging the State House leadership.
Okay, thank you very much. We will now move to the next question. And gentlemen, I will inform you that no matter how much you beg and plead with me, this will be the final question that we'll have tonight in the debate. So no, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, gentlemen. This has to be the final question.
Bill, no,
We'll begin this one with Mr. Flowers. Mr. Flowers, our 4 towns are going to have to create balanced budgets in the face of tremendous losses in revenue due largely to COVID-19. Basic services such as education and public safety are threatened going forward if state aid is reduced significantly, as seems likely. If elected, you will be asked to vote on a balanced state budget. But what about us? Is the state budget going to be balanced by slashing state aid and passing the burden down to the cities and towns? And what can you do to prevent that?
This is maybe the most important issue we face in the next few months. And my background as an economist, both 5 years at the Federal Reserve during the last Great Recession, and more recently, a labor economist with Indeed.com, the world's largest job site. My background makes me uniquely suited to go to the State House and fight against draconian budget cuts, austerity that is counterproductive in the face of this recession. And this, again, comes back to my main thing. Many in state government are dramatically underestimating the scale of the response needed. We may very well, and I don't mean to be alarmist, we may very well be entering a second Great Depression. In Massachusetts, the unemployment rate's over 16%. It's the 4th highest in the nation. Economists are projecting a $6 billion budget deficit, but it could be as high as $8 billion. And while we've level funded July and August for these 1/12 budgets at the state level, we need to think more broadly about how we're going to use 4 options to prevent budget cuts. There's 4 options we have. 1, we need to maximize federal aid. This is a little bit beyond the scope of a state rep's job. But as an economist, I will work with our federal delegation to tell them to resist the temptation to fearmonger about the budget deficit at the federal level. Because state and local governments have to have balanced budgets. We do, at least constitutionally in Massachusetts, but the federal government doesn't. And it's counterproductive to have budget cuts or try to balance a budget in the face of a recession. So that's the first step. Second thing, we need to think about utilizing the rainy day fund. It's $3.5 billion, but we can't exhaust it all right now because we don't know how bad this second Great Depression could be. Third point and fourth point, these are the main areas. We need to raise progressive revenue. And let me be pretty specific here. We need to have a tiered corporate minimum tax. Right now, it's only $456. That's the minimum corporate tax a company has in Massachusetts. We should have a tiered structure that varies depending on the company's size. Also, I would explore unearned income, or AKA investment income, capital gains tax, which, by the way, is lower than many surrounding states. That's a progressive revenue raiser. Also, the corporate tax, which was cut in the face of the last recession from 9.5% to 8%. We should explore raising that. And on top of the millionaire's tax, this progressive revenue can help forestall some of the budget cuts to education. And I will fight as a state rep to do that. But it's the fourth issue that I think my experience as an economist will really shine. We need to explore the debt budget because I mentioned it earlier. We need a Massachusetts Green New Deal. We need to explore, as we did in the early 90s, where the Commonwealth borrowed almost 10% of its revenues to invest in capital projects. They borrowed debt and they invested in capital projects. We need to electrify our bus and rail system. We need to have electric vehicle charging stations at libraries, town halls, parks. This can be done. It can employ laid off workers here in Massachusetts. It can be done. It'll be good for the economy.
Thank you, Mr. Flowers. Mr. Phillips, same question to you. Our 4 towns are going to have to create balanced budgets in the face of tremendous losses in revenue due largely to COVID-19. Basic services such as education and public safety are threatened going forward if state aid is reduced significantly, as seems likely. If elected, you will be asked to vote on a balanced state budget. But what about us? Is the state budget going to be balanced by slashing state aid and passing the burden down to the cities and towns? And what can you do to prevent that?
The pain is going to be felt at all levels. I don't want to sugarcoat that issue. We are, as you've heard, looking at a budget deficit of approximately, we actually don't know how big the hole is. We think it's somewhere around $6 billion. And it could, the Senate president has said she expects that it could be as large as $8 billion. We need to do, quite frankly, there's going to be some pain sharing because I'm not confident in the feds right now. I think that we could have, the federal government could come through with the resources if we get a Democratic president and hopefully take back the Senate, but I don't think we can bank on that. And so we're looking at very tough decisions ahead of us that we're going to have to make, where local aid cuts could come in as big as 20%. We're looking at Chapter 70 cuts that could be that large. And so my intention is going to be, we've got to keep our eye on the ball. We have to make sure that, we keep our businesses afloat. We invest in the future. I mean, COVID-19 has really revealed some serious inequities in our society. Making sure that PPE is still, at front and center as a priority is going to take up some of the time. And while it's true that the federal government can put things on the credit card that we can't, there have been some creative economic strategies that the treasurer has been authorized to do in order to take out a line of credit in order to pay for some of these things. Again, the millionaire's tax, which is a wonderful idea, is not going to take effect until 2023 if it's voted in 2022, but that's revenue that we needed back in 2015. So, it's going to be a very, very small Band-Aid on a very large gaping wound at that point. And so I think we need to get serious about, revenue and having a discussion about where that can come from. I like the sugary drink tax that's been proposed. I think that some of these taxes, which are sort of taxes of choice in consumer behavior, could be utilized and be very helpful in bringing some revenues about to take care of these issues. But the simple fact is that we're going to have a conversation about the income tax down the road. For years, Massachusetts has had a flat tax. We started out at 5%. We raised it, and through a ballot initiative, we've had to roll it back towards 5%. We need to move towards a graduated income tax. I think we have to start that discussion now because, again, we're looking at revenue in 2023 that we needed, in 2015. We need to have a conversation about adopting a graduated income tax, which is the millionaire's tax is actually a first step towards. But we have states like Iowa and South Carolina that have high marginal tax rates of around 9%. You can't tell me that they're more progressive states than Massachusetts when they're governed. And so I feel like we need to be considering that and looking at more progressive tax structures.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. Mr. Flowers, your final rebuttal of the evening.
I know time is limited and you can't touch on every issue, but I just want to use this last minute to talk about climate change because I think it really does tie into the economic recession we're facing. I mentioned the ideas of the Green New Deal in Massachusetts. Let's put that aside for a second. I want to talk about carbon pricing. This is a proven method to reduce carbon emissions by taxing heating fuels and other carbon polluters, but then rebating a majority of those funds raised back to low and moderate income people. So a majority of people, especially poor and middle class people, will be better off from this system. Well, what do you do with the other third of the carbon pricing revenue? And this is hundreds of millions of dollars. You invest in a green infrastructure fund. Former Rep. Jen Benson, I love her bill. I would champion it in the legislature. And Ted mentioned creative economic strategies. I'm an economist. This is the time for creative economic strategies. That's what I bring to the table.
Thank you, Mr. Flowers. And Mr. Phillips, your final rebuttal for tonight.
Andrew's point is an interesting one because climate change was sort of treated at this debate like it's been treated at the State House. It's one of those things that, oh yeah, we should really deal with that. And Andrew brought it up at the last minute, and I do think that we do need to do a lot more on climate change. I support Representative Decker's bill to get us to 100% renewable energy by 2035, as well as Representative Machino's bill to move us towards carbon neutrality by 2050 with hard deadlines in 2030, and 2040, so that we don't wind up in 2049 with with a bill that we can't live up to or a deadline that we can't make. So, I'm glad Andrew brought that up because I do think it's an important issue. I want to make sure that, people know that neither of us are paying lip service to that. We both believe that there's a lot that can be done on climate change. So I'm looking forward to working on it.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Great job on the questions. We'll now move to our closing statements. And in the terms of our coin flip earlier, the first closing statement will be given by Mr. Flowers.
So I mentioned earlier how as a teenager, I worked for my father's janitorial business. I'd get up before dawn and clean retail stores and office buildings, and then I'd race to school. Well, here's a funny thing about that. My brother Ed and we drove a pickup truck to high school. It was a 1988 silver Mitsubishi two-seater, and it was a beater. And if that wasn't embarrassing enough, in the back of it, when we would park, there would often be cleaning equipment. I'm talking backpack vacuum cleaners and toilet brushes and trash bags, lots of trash bags. So yeah, we were really embarrassed. But by the time we got to class, sometimes we fall asleep too, because we were up for a few hours helping the family business. When I think now where I'm at and where we are as a society right now during this COVID pandemic, and how we praise rightfully nurses and public safety workers who are truly heroes and on the front lines, I also think back about janitors and grocery workers and people who are also frontline heroes just as much. And it's for those people that I'm running, because I got involved, I got a passion for economics, not because I wanted to make a buck, but because I wanted to help poor and low and working and middle class people like my family. Today, I'm running because I have the experience we need. I'm passionate about state and local government for the same reason I was passionate about economics. It's not about being something, it's about doing something to make people's lives better, to give them a fair shot. The people like my family. Again, I'm running because I have the experience we need. Yes, it's the professional experience at the Federal Reserve and as an economist for a tech company. Yeah, that helps. Yes, it's the local experience on the finance committee and affordable housing. Yeah, that helps. But really, it's the personal experience growing up in a working class family that struggled. And that struggle gave me urgency. And urgency, as I've said, is what we need right now. The State House is not matching the urgency of the moment. Our towns, communities, our nation, our world, we're hitting crisis after crisis after crisis right now. And frankly, I'm worried that business as usual is just not going to get the job done. In years past, maybe that would have been okay, but not in today's world. I mean, the consequences could be detrimental for my kids' future, for your grandkids' future. The status quo is unacceptable. We need urgency, and I have it.
Thank you, Mr. Flowers. Mr. Phillips, we'll now move to your closing statement.
Thank you. And thank you to the Democratic Town Committees again for hosting tonight. Thank you, Bill, for moderating. This seat hasn't been open in 30 years. 30 years. And yet there are only 2 candidates in this race. I'd like to ask the viewers at home to think about why that is. It has nothing to do with Andrew. It has everything to do with the record of service that I've built for the past 15 years. People know me, both in the district and on Beacon Hill, who I am, how hard I work, and my track record of success. I've built relationships and networks, both in state and local government, that I am ready to put to work for you, the voters of this district. The Massachusetts Teachers Association, the Massachusetts Nurses Association, the Professional Firefighters of Massachusetts, Mass Retirees, the National Association of Government Employees, the 14 of the 18 select board members, including unanimously supporting me from the towns of Sharon, Stoughton, and Mansfield, and the working families of the AFL-CIO, all agree, all of them, on who they know will be the most effective state representative for this district. I hope that you'll agree too, and give me the honor of your vote on September 1st in the state primary. If we missed any topics tonight that you'd like to know more about, or if you'd like to just find out more about my candidacy, I would encourage you to go to my website, www.tedphillips.org, which is 1 L in Phillips, and drop me a line. Let me know what you care about, because I will get back to you immediately. I care very, very much about this district, and I look forward to being your next state representative. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. And I will tell all you folks, I'm so jealous because I don't live in the district, and therefore I can't vote for either one of these 2 very strong and wonderful candidates, but fortunately you can, and I hope you'll remember that. But that completes our debate for this evening. I would like to thank our 2 candidates, Andrew Flowers and Ted Phillips, for giving of their time and of themselves to run for office and for allowing you this chance to hear their thoughts and positions. We wish them each good luck in the state primary on September 1st. I would also like to thank our timer, Alicia Rinaldi, and our host on Zoom this evening, Michael Horan, both from the Stoughton Democratic Town Committee. And of course, thanks to the Democratic Town Committees from Mansfield, Sharon, Stoughton, and Walpole for asking me to moderate and for giving voters the opportunity to get to know the Democratic candidates for the 8th Norfolk District House seat. Lastly, we remind everyone that Election Day is Tuesday, September 1st. We know voting in the age of COVID presents some difficult challenges, but it is still very important. If you are unable to vote in person, you may obtain absentee ballots in advance from your town clerk's office. See the links on your town website or call your town hall. Your state and local governments play important roles in your life. It is your duty and your responsibility to take an active part in choosing the people who run them. Please make every safe and responsible effort to vote in this and every election. If you vote, you can be part of the solution. If you don't, you're just part of the problem. For the Democratic Town Committees of Mansfield, Sharon, Stoughton, and Walpole, I'm Bill Gavere. Thank you and good night.